Welcome to True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. In the warm, humid cradle of a southern town where Sunday bells rang like clockwork and neighbors greeted each other with smiles that hid their private struggles, New Mount Providence Baptist stood as the proud centerpiece. It wasn't just a church. It was a monument to tradition, to family, to the shared belief that faith could hold a community together through anything. Its high arched windows caught the morning sun, scattering light over pews worn smooth by decades of prayer. And at its heart was Reverend Elijah Warren, a man whose rich, sonorous voice could still a restless crowd, whose tailored suits and measured smile spoke of dignity, and whose words seemed to flow straight from the mouth of God. To his congregation, Elijah was more than a preacher. He was the model of Black excellence, a husband devoted to his elegant wife, Serena Warren, and a spiritual leader who shepherded his people with strength and compassion. But like many who bask in admiration, he wore his holiness like a robe he could take off when the sanctuary emptied. Behind closed doors, he walked a narrow line between image and indulgence, and for 3 years, that indulgence had a name, Layla Price. She was the church's star soloist, a woman whose voice could melt into a hymn so sweet it made the air itself feel holy. Her presence lit up the choir loft, her beauty an unspoken secret between the men who dared look too long. Yet beneath her graceful posture and warm smile lay a past stitched together with abandonment and scars. Layla had grown up in a home where stability was a stranger. Her mother's love came in fragments, divided between a revolving door of men who each left deeper wounds than the last. By the time she was grown, Layla had learned the dangerous lesson that affection had to be earned and that men only stayed until they found a better reason to leave. Elijah, with his easy charm and promises wrapped in scripture, had felt different. He had seen her when she felt invisible, spoken to her as if she was not merely part of his flock, but a woman worth noticing. He made her feel chosen, special, irreplaceable. That was all she'd ever wanted, to be the one someone would never leave. Their affair began quietly, late-night phone calls, knowing glances across the sanctuary, unplanned meetings in corners where shadows were thick and footsteps went unheard. At first, Elijah was intoxicated by her youth, her adoration, and the thrill of living in the dangerous space between sin and salvation. In whispered conversations, he told her he was trapped, that Serena had long since become more obligation than love, that his marriage was a hollow thing he endured for appearances, and Layla, longing to be needed, believed every word. But Elijah's intention had never been to leave his wife. Layla was an escape, a secret indulgence he could set aside whenever the weight of his real life pressed too heavily. In his mind, the sin was manageable, invisible. As long as it stayed hidden, he told himself, no harm was done. But sin is never content to stay small. It grows in the dark until it swallows the man who feeds it. For every lie told in whispers, there comes a day when the truth shouts louder. Layla, in the early months, was patient. She trusted his timeline, accepted his excuses about why he couldn't leave just yet. She told herself that love this pure took time to untangle from the wrong life. But as the seasons passed and his visits grew shorter, his calls fewer, and his eyes less certain when they met hers, something began to sour in her heart. Doubt took root, twisting itself into desperation. She started pressing harder, asking when he would follow through on his vows to her, when he would stop pretending with Serena. Elijah, practiced in his deceit, tried to pacify her with soft tones and shallow reassurances, but Layla could feel the shift. The warmth in his voice had cooled. The urgency in their meetings had drained away. She could see him pulling back, and it terrified her. The moment that turned fear into fury came quietly. One afternoon, in the church office, she overheard 2 choir members chatting softly about Serena, how beautiful she looked, how her glow was undeniable at 6 months pregnant. Pregnant. The word was a blade, cutting through every story Elijah had spun. He had told her he was done with his marriage, that his heart belonged to her. Yet he was building a family with the very woman he'd claimed to be leaving. In that instant, love twisted into something sharper, something dangerous. A heart betrayed can carry a grief so violent that it no longer seeks to heal, it seeks to avenge. She began sending him messages stripped of patience or pretense. You told me I was your future. You lied. If I can't have you, she won't either. Her obsession with him, once a fever, boiled into a steady, dangerous heat. Then came the night she showed up at his doorstep. The street was quiet, save for her pounding fists against the door, her voice breaking the stillness as she screamed his name. When the door opened, it wasn't Elijah who appeared, it was Serena, poised in a silk robe, her expression a blend of confusion and faint concern. Layla's eyes were wild, her voice ragged as she demanded to see him, spilling accusations into the humid night air. From the top of the staircase, Elijah froze, the threads of his carefully crafted life snapping in real time. He had thought he could control her, that words could pull her back from the brink, but the storm was here, and it was staring down his wife. Serena's confusion shifted into suspicion, her gaze darting between them. Elijah moved fast, guiding her behind him, stepping outside and closing the door to muffle the chaos. His grip on Layla's arm was tight, his voice sharp. You need to leave before you embarrass yourself. But Layla had crossed the point of return. You don't get to do this to me, she spat, tears burning trails down her cheeks. You told me you loved me. You told me I was the one. Across the street, porch lights flicked on, curtains shifted, and neighbors' eyes began to gather in the shadows. Elijah's tone softened, his words reshaped into a story for the audience now listening. Layla, I told you this had to end. I have a wife, a family. You're chasing something that was never real. Her lips parted in disbelief. That's not true, she whispered. But he pressed forward, steady and deliberate, his voice carrying just enough to reach curious ears. I never encouraged this. I told you from the start it couldn't happen, but you wouldn't let it go. Now you're showing up at my home, causing a scene, trying to ruin my life. The betrayal was surgical, cutting her down in front of strangers, turning her from lover to lunatic in a single breath. Serena reappeared in the doorway, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. What's going on? She asked coldly. Elijah didn't miss a beat. She's been after me for months, trying to tempt me. When I said no, she started acting out. The lie slid easily from his mouth, and Layla's breath caught like she'd been struck. You're a coward, she said, her voice breaking. But to the neighbors, she was exactly what he painted her to be, unstable, obsessed, unhinged. Elijah looked at her one final time, voice calm but empty. Go home, Layla. Get some help. He turned away, guiding Serena back inside, the door closing with a sound that felt like a lock clicking inside her chest. The porch lights dimmed, the night swallowed the street again, and Lila stood in the silence knowing she had lost him, and with him, the last fragments of her dignity. When a man saves himself by sacrificing the truth, he leaves behind a ruin that will not rest until it devours him whole.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
The next Sunday morning, the sanctuary of New Mount Providence Baptist shimmered with energy. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, spilling colors onto the polished wooden floor. The choir, draped in royal blue robes, swayed with the music, voices rising like incense into the high rafters. The congregation clapped, tapped their feet, and answered each lyric with a chorus of Amen. At the pulpit, Reverend Elijah Warren stood tall and assured, his voice carrying through the room with the weight of authority. His sermon, titled God's Promise in Marriage, rang with conviction. He spoke of loyalty, trust, and the sacred covenant between a man and a woman. To anyone listening, his words would have sounded like truth carved from stone. But in the back pew, hidden from most eyes, Layla Price sat still, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her purse. She hadn't slept a full hour the night before. Her apartment had become a storm, lamps knocked over, books scattered, dishes cracked where they'd struck the wall. She had screamed until her throat ached, cried until her eyes burned, and paced until her legs trembled. She'd seen it all in her mind, his hand resting gently on Serena's pregnant belly, his lips pressed to hers in quiet moments, their whispered plans for a future together, a future he had once promised to her. And now, there he was, standing at the altar of God, telling the world about fidelity with a voice that had once whispered the most elaborate lies into her ear. The sight churned her stomach. Her thumb traced the edge of the object hidden in her purse, feeling its cold, unforgiving weight. When Elijah opened the floor for testimonies, she rose. Her movement drew a few glances, but she walked with a deliberate slowness down the center aisle. Elijah's eyes found hers and widened slightly, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The usher handed her the microphone, and Layla turned to face the congregation. "I have a testimony," she said. Her voice was steady, slicing clean through the air. The room fell silent in an instant. Elijah shifted behind the pulpit, his jaw tightening. "This man, your pastor, has been lying to you. For 3 years, he has been in a relationship with me." A ripple of gasps swept through the pews. Serena's face drained to a pale stillness, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "He told me he loved me, that he would leave his wife, that we would start a life together, and I believed him." Murmurs erupted, some in shock, some in disbelief. Several women covered their mouths. A few deacons exchanged nervous glances, as if silently debating who should intervene. Elijah stepped forward, his voice low and strained. "Layla, this is not the time." "Shut your mouth," she snapped. Her hand dipped into her purse. In a motion that was both fluid and final, she drew out a black handgun. Screams erupted immediately. Parents snatched their children from the aisles, some ducking behind pews, others bolting for the doors. Elijah froze, his eyes locked on the weapon. Layla's grip was unshakable as she leveled it at the altar. The first shot rang like thunder. Elijah staggered backward, a dark red stain spreading across the front of his suit. His knees gave way, and he crumpled to the base of the altar steps, the Bible he had been preaching from sliding from his hands onto the floor. Serena's scream was raw enough to split the air. She rushed to his side, kneeling, her hands pressing desperately against the wound as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Help him! Somebody, please!" Her voice cracked with panic, but her hands were steady, her silk blouse already soaked with his blood. Elijah's lips moved, but no words came out. His breath was shallow, each gasp a struggle. Layla stepped forward, her voice low and cold. "You took him from me. Please, please don't," she pleaded, one hand still clamped over her husband's chest. The second shot was deafening in the confined space. Serena gasped, her body jerking as the bullet tore through her abdomen. She slumped forward over Elijah, their blood mingling in a widening pool on the polished wood. The unborn child she carried was lost in that same instant. The sanctuary dissolved into chaos. People shoved toward the exits, knocking over hymnals, trampling bulletins. Others froze in their places, unable to move, their hands clutching loved ones. Wails echoed against the vaulted ceiling, tangled with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Layla looked down at the sight before her, the man she had given everything for, and the woman who had stood between them, now lying motionless in each other's arms. A rising wail of sirens broke through the noise. Without hesitation, she raised the gun to her own temple. Her breath trembled, but her hands did not. The final shot tore through the air, leaving a stillness that seemed to stretch forever. When love is poisoned by obsession, it stops being love. It becomes a slow, certain death, and it kills more than hearts. The slaughter at New Mount Providence Baptist was like a storm that left no roof untouched and no heart unbroken. The church that had once been the pride of the town now stood in eerie silence, its heavy oak doors locked, the pulpit abandoned, the choir loft empty. The air inside still held the faint scent of candle wax and the sharper tang of gunpowder, as if the building itself refused to forget. Outside, the small patch of lawn where congregants once lingered after service was deserted. No one wanted to stand too close to a place where joy had been replaced by horror. News of what had happened spread faster than the sirens had that morning. Within hours, neighbors whispered it over fences, customers murmured about it in barber shops and beauty salons, and every corner store had someone shaking their head in disbelief. Those who had called Reverend Elijah Warren their pastor found themselves trapped between grief and betrayal. He had baptized their babies, counseled them through heartbreak, buried their dead. His prayers had soothed them. His sermons had stirred their souls. And yet the man they had trusted with their faith had been living a double life that ended in murder. How could the shepherd they had followed so faithfully be the same man who had drawn a woman into such a tangled web of deceit? Some refused to believe the accusations at all, insisting Layla Price was just an unstable woman, blinded by obsession. Others, especially those who had seen the confrontation outside his home, were less sure. The church board moved quickly, hoping to control the damage. Behind closed doors, they drafted statements framing the tragedy as an isolated incident, a jealous woman lashing out in a moment of madness. But truth, like water, has a way of finding its way through every crack. Investigators began to dig, and what they unearthed peeled away whatever clean image remained of Elijah. Layla was not the first woman he had charmed under the guise of spiritual guidance. Records and testimonies showed a pattern stretching back over a decade, multiple affairs, each cloaked in secrecy and protected by his influence. When one woman tried to speak out, she was met with hush money disguised as benevolence from church funds. Those same funds had been used for personal vacations labeled as ministry work, expensive gifts for women outside his marriage, and even cash withdrawals with no explanation at all. The pattern was undeniable. When a man makes his pulpit a stage for lies, he forgets that even stone sanctuaries can crack under the weight of truth. The deeper the investigation went, the darker the shadow over New Mount Providence became. The church board realized there was no salvaging his name. His sermons were removed from the website. Photographs of him, once framed in the hallway, were quietly taken down. His name was scrubbed from all church literature, as if erasing him could also erase the pain he left behind. But for those who had once trusted him, forgetting was impossible. Attendance plummeted. The once packed pews now sat half empty, their emptiness a silent accusation. Families that had been part of the congregation for generations left altogether, unwilling to return to a place where they'd been deceived. Others stayed, but carried their faith like something fragile, easily shattered. In whispered conversations after service, they wondered how many other pastors preached righteousness while hiding sins of their own, and whether the men they followed on Sunday could ever truly be trusted. New Mount Providence had been a beacon of hope, a gathering place where faith was renewed each week. Now it was a monument to scandal, its silence louder than any choir. At first, the elders and remaining leaders clung to a single story, as if repetition could make it true, that the shooting was nothing more than the act of a woman consumed by jealousy, that Reverend Elijah Warren had been an unfortunate target of an unstable mind. But the facts refused to bend. Layla Price's life unraveled in public because Elijah had woven her into a net of promises he never meant to keep. She was not the first to step into his shadows, but she was the one whose pain had spilled out in a way that could never be cleaned up. Reporters descended on the town like a second storm. Cameras flashed at the church gates. Journalists stopped townsfolk on sidewalks, their questions sharp and unyielding. Headlines screamed about the preacher's secret life, about love, lies, and blood on the altar. Each article painted a more detailed portrait of the man who had once stood in spotless robes before his congregation. In living rooms, barber shops, and kitchen tables, the conversations changed. People no longer spoke of Elijah as a victim. They spoke of him as a man who had betrayed his vows, his church, and his God. They talked about the money he'd stolen from the offering plate to fund hotel rooms and weekend getaways. They whispered about women who had quietly left the church years before, their stories dismissed until now. And beneath the gossip lay the heavier question: had Layla been pushed so far by betrayal that she broke, or had she always been a fuse waiting for a spark? Truth has a cruel way of holding more than one answer. A woman who carries the weight of old wounds can be both victim and weapon. A man who knows her history and feeds her false hope is striking matches in a room soaked in gasoline. The altar, once a place of vows and redemption, had become the scene of their destruction. Its steps still bore the faint stains of blood, scrubbed until the wood turned dull. Those who had once stood there to speak of salvation now stepped carefully, their eyes lowered as though afraid to look too long. To the congregation, the space felt different, as if the echoes of what had happened could not be prayed away. The elders tried to erase him as completely as possible. His name was removed from every church document, stripped from plaques, and deleted from the website's archives. Framed portraits of him, which once greeted members at the entrance, were taken down and hidden away. His sermons, once shared online for those who couldn't attend in person, were pulled without explanation. To the outside world, it looked as if Reverend Elijah Warren had never existed. But absence has a voice of its own. It was there in the empty pews, in the choir's thinner harmonies, in the wary way members looked at their new pastor. It was there in the sudden quiet after service, when once people would linger and laugh. The murders at New Mount Providence were not just the end of a pastor's career. They were a mirror held up to the whole congregation, reflecting every blind trust, every unquestioned loyalty, every time someone chose to see the man and not the warning signs. When a leader builds his kingdom on lies, it will crumble in his lifetime, and those who helped hold the walls will feel the dust in their own hands. In the weeks that followed, the weight of the scandal pressed down on the town like thick summer air before a storm. The church grounds, once busy with midweek Bible studies, youth rehearsals, and deacon meetings, sat empty except for the occasional passerby who slowed down just to stare. The sight of the locked front doors seemed almost unthinkable. Those same doors that had been open to all for generations now stood as a barrier, not just to entry, but to the memory of what had been lost. Yet for many, the building itself wasn't the wound. The true injury lay in the way the tragedy peeled back every layer of Elijah Warren's carefully constructed life. More details leaked from the investigation. Hotel receipts disguised as spiritual retreats, text messages to women that read more like love letters than counsel, quiet payments to keep certain voices silent. Even the trips to other cities that the congregation had proudly funded, believing they were sending their pastor to spread the word, now took on a darker meaning. The trust that had been their currency was gone. And once trust is gone, it leaves behind a hunger for answers that can never fully be satisfied. Some members avoided each other in public, too ashamed to discuss how they had defended him in the early days, repeating the elders' narrative about Layla being unstable. Others met in kitchens and living rooms late into the night, replaying every encounter, every sermon, every small moment that now seemed suspicious in hindsight. They asked themselves how they could have been so blind. The truth was simple. Elijah had been exactly the man they wanted him to be until the mask slipped. When sin wears the face of holiness, it blinds those who wish to believe. And belief, when misplaced, becomes a leash the sinner learns to pull. The media attention slowly shifted to other stories, but the people of New Mount Providence couldn't look away from their own wreckage. The young members of the choir, who had once been inspired by Layla's voice, now sang with a heaviness that no music could lift. The elders carried themselves with a stiffness, their voices quieter when they spoke of church business. Even the children sensed the change. They no longer ran laughing through the aisles after service, as if some unspoken rule told them joy didn't belong here anymore. The space between what the church had been and what it had become was wide and cold. It wasn't just about Elijah or Layla or the violent mourning that had ended both of their lives. It was about the loss of something more fragile, innocence. Not the innocence of youth, but the innocence of believing that the person leading you toward heaven wasn't secretly walking a path to ruin. And ruin, once revealed, can't be unseen. The murders at New Mount Providence were never just about a woman with a gun or a man who lived in lies. They were about what happens when sin is left to grow unchecked, when hurt is fed instead of healed, and when truth is traded for secrecy. Reverend Elijah Warren had built his life on charm, manipulation, and control, believing himself untouchable. Layla Price, desperate for love she had never known, gave her heart to a man who saw her only as a hidden indulgence. Love, when twisted by obsession and betrayal, becomes a dangerous thing. It does not save, it destroys. And when two broken souls collide in the dark, the damage reaches far beyond them. The altar where they fell will always carry the memory of that morning, no matter how many times the floor is scrubbed or how many sermons are preached there in the years to come. Let this stand as a warning. When the weight of lies and heartbreak becomes too heavy, violence will never be the answer. No betrayal, no matter how deep, is worth spilling blood. If you find yourself consumed by hurt or anger, if you feel trapped in secrets that are breaking you apart, choose the harder, braver path. Step away. Speak to someone you trust. Go to the necessary authorities who can help you find justice the right way. Show love, even when it feels undeserved, because the cost of hatred is always higher than we think. Sin will always whisper for you to take matters into your own hands, but wisdom knows that some battles must be fought with truth, not weapons. And truth, when handled with courage, can set you free without destroying what can never be restored. What happened here should never happen again. Not in this town, not in any town. Tell us what you think about this tragedy in the comments below. Do you believe this was the act of a woman pushed beyond her limit? Or was it the choice of someone who always had this in her? Share your thoughts and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that reveal the darkness hiding in plain sight. Because for every Elijah Warren, there are others whose secrets are just one breath away from being exposed.